I remember when I first talked to my wife, when we first met and when we first started talking to each other, it was when we were 17. And I remember, we would talk on the phone for hours and hours. And we would, it was so fun. It was so exciting, to get to know her and she get to know me, and even though, at that time, my dad would take away my phone, and I would buy like one of those brick Nokia phone, and I would call it late at night, and we'll talk for hours, and it was so fun. It was so exciting. But then, after a year and a half, after 2 years, it wasn't as fun as anymore. It wasn't as exciting talking on the phone anymore, especially long distance. Sometime in our relationship with God, sometime that can happen as well. It can happen as well in a sense where the beginning is so much exciting. The beginning is so fun. When we first received Jesus, or when we first, accepted Jesus as our Lord and Savior, or when we first encounter God for the first time, the beginning is so fun, it's so exciting, we're so pumped for it, but maybe years after into walking with God, years after into, in our faith with God, maybe the excitement seemed to worn down. Maybe the fun seemed to worn down. Maybe we're not as excited as we were in the beginning. I remember when I first got saved, when I first truly received Jesus. I remember I was so fire for Him. I was so passionate about God. I remember my whole week was all about God. I remember on Monday night I would attend Riverview Bible Study. On Wednesday night, I would attend Pastor Samuel Bible study. On Friday night, I would lead my own Bible study at my youth group. And on Saturday, I would have my own youth group. And on Sunday morning, I would go to Riverview Church at 9 in the morning. And then 12:30, I would go to my Korean church. And then in the evening, I would go to like a connect group. Sometime I would come with my parents to Grace and Peace. And, it was so fun. That was my season for 1.5 years, and I never get tired. I never get burned out. It was fun. It was exciting, and I look forward every day. I look forward to, attending those things. But now, if I'm honest, it's not as exciting as before. It's not as fun as before. It's not as, looking forward to it as before. And maybe some of us here can relate to that. Maybe for some of us here, that might be true. At one point it was fun. At one point it was exciting. At one point we were on fire. At one point we were so passionate. At one point, we love reading our Bible, and God speaks to us. We love praying and God speaks to us. But maybe years into our walk with God, years into our relationship with God, maybe it's not as fun or it's not as exciting anymore. And I want to talk about the middle. And I call that the middle. It's the middle because in the middle is when, nothing exciting is happening. In the middle is when everything maybe begin to worn out a little bit. The middle is, maybe when what God wants for you, or maybe when God's plan for you, but maybe in the middle is when things hasn't happened yet. Things hasn't happened the way you wanted, or things hasn't happened the way you expected, or things hasn't happened the way God told you to. It's the middle. So what I want to do today is we're going to look at a story, and we're going to look at the story of Joseph. I think Joseph is probably one of the greatest example of learning to live in the middle. Because when we look at the life of Joseph, the beginning is so exciting, and the end is so exciting, but not the middle. The beginning, when he was 17 years old, he received a dream from God, a God-given dream. A dream that his brothers and his family will bow down to him. A dream that, he will be someone that has power, someone that has influence, someone that has authority, and he's excited. And we see that at the end, he became the second most powerful man in Egypt. And that was fun and that was exciting. But what about the middle? The middle is when he was sold as a slave. The middle is when he was hated by his brother. The middle is when he was accused of doing something he did not do. The middle is when he was thrown into prison, right? And sometime in our life, we have those seasons of our life as well, where it's not the beginning, where it's not the end, but it's the middle. And the truth is this, most of our life, especially most of our Christian life, is lived in the middle. We need to learn how to walk with God in the middle. We need to learn how to have faith in the middle. We need to realize what God is doing in the middle. So that's what I want to talk to you today. But before we go there, what I want to point out to you is this. So when Joseph was a slave at Potiphar's house, this is what we are told. Genesis chapter 39, verse 2. Let's read this together. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. So when Joseph was a prisoner, this is what we are told. Genesis chapter 39, verse 21. Let's read this together. The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eye of the prison warden. So here we are told, in the middle of his life, we are told that God has not abandoned him. In the middle, we are told, God has not left him alone. In the middle, we are told, we are reminded again and again that God is with him and that God is blessing him and God has caused him to be prosperous and God has caused him to be successful and God has caused him to have favor with other people. So in the middle, God never forgot about him. God is still with him. In the same way, in our middle, God is still with us. God is still for us. God is still near us. God is still helping us. It might not feel like God is close to us. It might not feel like, the promises of God are not coming true. But nevertheless, God is with us. God is for us. God is near us. So what does God teach us in the middle? The very first thing that God teaches us is this. In the middle, God is teaching us to trust him. Look at your neighbor and tell him, God is teaching us to trust him. God is teaching us to trust him. So when Joseph was 17 years old, this is what we are told in Genesis chapter 37, verse 5. So Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So here Joseph was given a dream by God, and he was probably very excited about this dream, excited to share with his brothers, excited to share with his father, but when he told his brothers this dream, they were not as excited like him. The father was not excited like him. Instead, right after he told his brother this dream, we are told things kind of go downhill from there. We are told that the brother began to hate him all the more. The brother, if we continue to read forward, we see that the brother were planning to kill him. And the brother would put him in a pit. Right? And the brother, throw him into a prison. So we see right after, God giving this dream, we were told things happened to him literally opposite of what he dreamed about. He dreamed about the fact that his brother will bow down to him, but his brother hated him all the more. He dreamed that he will be powerful. He was sold as a slave. He dreamed that he would have some sort of authority, but he was thrown into prison. And in these circumstances, in this difficulty, in the middle, this is when Joseph have to learn to trust God. Every day, when Joseph wake up as a slave, he have to choose, am I going to trust God today? When Joseph wake up as a prisoner, he have to choose, am I going to trust God today? When Joseph wake up and being falsely accused, he have to choose, will I trust God today? When Joseph was in prison and when he was forgotten by the cupbearer, he have to ask, he have to decide, will I trust God today? Because when we look at the story of Joseph, we know how the story goes. We know the ending. We flip a few chapters and we see how Joseph is fine. Eventually Joseph made it out of life. Eventually Joseph made it out of prison. Eventually Joseph become someone that is powerful and his dream come true. But in that moment, Joseph doesn't know. Joseph doesn't have the answer like us. Joseph is living it out. He don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. He don't know where his life going to turn out tomorrow. He don't know. And in that moment, in the middle, in those circumstances, in those difficulties, he have to trust God. Am I going to trust God today? In the same way, when we look at the life of Abraham, we'll also see the same thing. There's a powerful beginning, and there's a difficult middle, and there's a powerful end. In the powerful beginning in Genesis chapter 12, the Bible tells us that God spoke to Abraham and God promised Abraham. God promised Abraham that, hey, I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you and everyone on earth will be blessed through you. Can you imagine if you're Abraham and you hear those promises and yes, God, yes, please use me. Yes, have your ways in me. Yes, God, I surrender to you. Yes, God, I want all of that to come true. Make me great, use me for your glory. Use me for your kingdom. It's fun. It's exciting. But then we continue to read the story of Abraham. And we saw that God told him to go to a place where he's never been before. God told him to go to a place, and we are told as soon as he got there was famine there in the land, and he had to move to Egypt. We're told he have to live with people that he's not used to, live in a culture that he's not familiar with. And on top of that, years after years, God has not yet given Abraham a son. God promised Abraham to make him into a great nation and to have many descendants, but Abraham at that time, Abraham had no son yet. So in that moment, you have to choose, am I going to trust God? Am I going to trust God's promises? Am I going to trust God's words? And then we get to Genesis chapter 16, and when he was still, childless, his wife asked him to sleep with Hagar, to have a son through her, and we see that he agreed to it, and why did he agree to it? Ultimately, it is because in that moment, Abraham no longer trusted God's promises. In that moment, Abraham would probably feel like, God, you're taking too long. God, you're taking too long, so I'm going to do it myself. God, you haven't opened the door yet, so I'm going to open the door myself. God, you haven't provided for me yet, so I'm going to find my way to provide for myself. I'm going to force myself in. I'm going to try to do what I can to make that promise come true, to make that word come true, to make that, what you say come true. I'm going to force myself in. I'm going to do it in my own way. Yeah, I want to share with you something. This is something that I've literally just reflected on. I think just less than a month ago. So it's very fresh, and to be honest, I'm a little embarrassed about it now that I've reflected on it. But I want to share with you. So in 2019, I went with Pastor Rupert to New Zealand. We went to Aaron and his family were there, and I think Levi grandparents were there, and a few other people from church were there, and we went there to a combined camp there. And at the combined camp, I met a friend. His dad was a pastor in America, in Omaha. His dad was also, his dad got invited to also speak at the camp as well. So at the camp, we start talking, we got to know each other, and we become friends. And then at the camp, we were doing ministry together. He was very gifted and very talented with all the with music. So I asked him to lead worship. When I was sharing the message with the youth, and so we become friends there. And after New Zealand, he and his dad, they come to Perth for 2 weeks. They come to Perth to visit the family as well in Perth in 2 weeks. And when he was in Perth, I was hanging out with him. And at that time in Perth, I was involved in Pastor Samuel Bible study, and I was one of the leaders there. I was in charge of the program and stuff like that. And so I asked Pastor Samuel, hey, I got this friend who came from America, and he's great, he's amazing, he loves Jesus, and can I ask him to come and share a message this week at Bible study? And Pastor Samuel said, yeah, sure, that's fine. So I invited this friend to come and share, at our Bible study, and he did. He come and share, with the Bible study, and then a few years after that, my family and I, we went to Omaha. We went to visit my grandma in America. So when I got there, I messaged my friend. I text my friend, hey bro, I'm in Omaha. Let's catch up. And if I have to be totally honest with you, when I was messaging him, I didn't just want to catch up with him. I was kind of hoping that he might invite me back to his church to preach. I'm not going to lie. I was in my heart, I was hoping, when he was in Perth, I invited him to come and preach at our Bible study. Now that I'm in his city, I'm kind of hoping that he would invite me to preach at his church, Even though I didn't say out loud, I was thinking that in my heart, and of course, he invited me, and I ended up preaching full time at his church in 1 week. I ended up preaching in the youth group, and then in the Sunday service, in the English service, and then his dad asked me to come and preach at one of the church member birthday, and then I did a live stream Facebook for the church, full time that week, and just this week, just this past month, I just reflect on that, and I reflect on it, why, why do I have that, why do I want that? Was that was that really from God? It made me question, was it really from God? Did God really want me to speak there? Or was I using my relationship with my friends to kind of return the favor? So that kind of made me question a little bit. And I kind of reflect on that a little bit. And the point is, the point that I'm trying to say is this. Sometime in the middle, instead of waiting for God to open the door, or instead of waiting for God to, bring the opportunity, or instead of waiting for God to bring His promises come true, sometimes we rush it. Just like Abraham, we rush it. Sometimes just like me, we rush it. We're trying to use, we're not trying to use friendship to get what we want or to get invited or whatever it is. But when we look at Joseph, he didn't rush. He didn't rush. He didn't complain, when he was a slave, when he was a prisoner, when he was accused of doing something wrong, he waited and he trusted God. He waited and he relied on God. He waited for God. And remember, in the middle of our life, sometimes that is what God is asking us to do, to trust Him. Even though nothing is happening right now, even though we're not being asked to do anything right now, even though we're not giving a ability right now, or even though, we're not having any position right now, and we're not giving any opportunity right now, maybe God is just asking us to trust Him, to wait for Him. So that's number one. In the middle, God is asking us to trust Him. God is teaching us to trust Him. The second point is this. In the middle, God is teaching us to obey Him. In the middle, God is teaching us to obey Him. While Joseph was a slave, we are told that God is with him. God has not abandoned him. God has not forgot about him, but God is with him. And as a result of that, he prospered. And as a result of him being prosperous, this is what we are told in Genesis chapter 39, verse 6 and 7. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was very well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." Right? So here, Joseph is faced with a huge decision here. Here, the decision that Joseph is facing is, am I going to obey God or am I going to disobey God? And what we need to realize is that this is the middle of the story. This is the middle of his life, where his dream hasn't come true yet. The brothers are not bowing down to him, and he's not a free man yet. He's still a foreigner. He's still separated from his father. And here, Joseph could have easily Joseph could have easily, choose that, what, God, nothing is happening to me. Nothing good is happening to me. So you know what? I'm going to give into my flesh. Or you know what? I'm going to do what I want. Or you know what? I'm going to disobey you because God, you're not going to, your promise haven't come true yet. And sometime in our life, think about the time that you sin. Think about the time that we fall into sin. Think about the time that we disobey God. Is actually in times when we are frustrated. It's actually in time when we are disappointed. It's actually in time when we are lonely. It is in time when we are angry. It is in time when we are spiritually dry. Usually it's in those times that sin looks more attractive than God. Usually in those times that we disobey God. Usually in those times that we give into the temptation. It's the same for Joseph, if we think about it. It's a lonely time for him. He's away from his family. It's a frustrating time for him. He's a slave. It's a difficult time for him. And yet, what did Joseph choose to do? He chose God. He chose to be obedient to God. This is what we are told. This is how Joseph responded to that. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 8 to 10 say this. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or be with her. Here we are told the way Joseph responds, his main concern was this: I don't want to sin against God. His main concern was, I don't want to wrong God. I don't want to disobey God. I don't want to commit something that is a sin against God. No, I will not do. Right? So even though, he's in a season of his life where nothing is happening. He's in a season of his life where promise hasn't been fulfilled. He still chooses God. He still chooses to obey God. It's usually in the middle. It is when nothing is happening in the middle, it reveals why we obey God. It reveals the reason for our obedience. Because the truth is this, when everything is going our way, it's very easy to obey God. When God is answering our prayer, it's very easy to obey God. When God is opening opportunity for us and giving us what our heart desire, it's very easy to obey God. But what if God is silent? What if God is not giving us what we want? What if we're in a season where we feel like it's not going the way we want it, it's not going the way we were expecting, in a season where we are frustrated, in a season where we are angry, in a season where we are dry? The question is, will we still choose to obey God? Think about it this way. Let's just say there was a father, and he's old, and he's in aged care. He is in an aged care home, and he told his son, "Hey, son, I miss you and I want to see you. And if you come and visit me, every time you come and visit me, I'm going to give you $1,000. So every time the son come and visit the father gave him $1,000. And so of course the son go and visit his father in the elderly home, and the son spend time with the father. The son get to know the father more. The son sit with the father, just talking with the father. And outside, people look at that and wow, this son, he really loved his father. This son really just want to be with his father. But then one day the father said to the son, "Hey, son, I still want to see you. I still want you to visit me, but I'm not going to give you $1,000 anymore. I'm not going to give you anything anymore, but I still want to see you." And can you imagine if the son stopped visiting him? The moment the father stopped giving him money and he stopped coming to see his father, right? That will reveal why he go and see the father. Not because he want to spend time with the father, not because he loved the father, not because he liked to be in the father company. No, it's because of the $1,000 that he received. Sometimes, in our faith, it's like that as well, where, we only obey if God give us something. We only obey if God, if God revealed to us something, if He's giving us what we want, if things turn out the way we want it, only then we will obey. But you see, in the Bible, again and again, what we see is that the basis of our obedience is not what God gave us. It's not how much God bless us. The basis of our obedience is our love for Him. This is what Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 15. Jesus said this, "If you love me, keep my command." The basis of our obedience is loving God. So here, what Joseph has, the fact that Joseph obeyed God in that difficult moment, it shows that Joseph is someone that loved God. He's not someone that loved God because God gave him a nice dream. He's not someone that loved God because, God gave him, a very huge, a very important dream. No. He's someone that loved God because he's someone that loved God. He loved God for who God is, not because of what God can give him. And the question for us is this, will we still obey God when God is not giving us anything? Will we still choose purity, when no one is watching? Will we still serve God, when no one is taking notice of us? Are we still going to read our Bible, even though we feel like it's not exciting anymore? The Bible tells us that, Potiphar's wife tempted Joseph day after day. Not just one day, not just 2 days, but day after day. And day after day, he have to choose God. Day after day, he have to be obedient to God. Day after day, he have to say no to his flesh and yes to the Spirit of God. Day after day, he have to choose to be obedient. And the thing is, if we think about it, this is also building his character. Because when he become the second most powerful man in Egypt, there's going to be many temptation. Maybe temptation from other female, or maybe temptation to bride, or maybe temptation to corruption. And but because he have that integrity, because he chose to obey God when he had nothing, when we choose to obey God when he was a slave, he will choose to obey God when he is in power, when he has authority as well. So that's the second point. And the third point is this. In the middle, God prepare us for what is ahead. In the middle is when God is preparing us for what is ahead. So when Joseph received this dream, yes, the brother bowed down to him. But ultimately, that dream means he's going to be someone that has power and that has authority. And we'll continue to read the Bible, and we see that dream come true. And Joseph became the second most powerful man in Egypt. But Joseph also have responsibility. When he became the second most powerful man in Egypt, Joseph's responsibility was to prepare Egypt for the 7 years of famine that they are going to face. In other words, Joseph will require, Joseph will need to lead people. Joseph will need to know how to manage people, how to manage resources. Joseph will need to know how to organize people and how to organize things and how to organize food and how to plan ahead and how to plan for 7 years. And, where do you think Joseph learned all those skills? He didn't just wake up one day and have that knowledge. Joseph learned those skills in the middle. Joseph learned those skills when he was a slave. Joseph learned those skills when he was in prison. When he was a slave, this is what we are told. Genesis chapter 39, verse 4. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. In other words, in Potiphar's household. And Potiphar is not just some little fish. He's a big fish. He's a big dude. He's someone that has, resources. He's rich, right? And here we're told Joseph was put in charge to manage everything in the household. So that's when Joseph learned how to organize. That's when Joseph learned how to be responsible. That's when Joseph learned how to lead people. That's when Joseph learned how to plan ahead. And not only that, but when he was in prison, this is what we are told. Genesis chapter 39, verse 21 to 22, this is what we are told. The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. In prison, again, Joseph had to learn how to lead people, how to organize people, how to plan ahead, how to make resources, how to be a leader, how to be in charge. Joseph learned all of that. The reason why Joseph learned all of that is to prepare him for when he became the second most powerful man in Egypt, for when he had to plan for the 7 years of famine in Egypt. You see, the point that I'm trying to make is this. The middle is not a waste. The middle is not a waste. When you feel like things are not going the way you want it, it's not a waste. When you feel like things are not happening, it's not a waste. Even in our youth group, if we think about it, a few years, a few years, there were a time when we feel like nothing was happening. There was a time when we feel like everything was just dry. There was a time when we feel like, God is not moving. No, but God is doing something. In the middle, God is doing something. In the middle, God is preparing. Right? So don't be discouraged. If God is putting you in the middle, don't be discouraged. It's not a waste. Don't be discouraged. Don't try to leave. Don't try to get out of the middle too early. No, God is doing something in the middle. God is doing something in the middle. Can I have the worship team to come on, please? So the truth is, in our life, in our faith journey, in our spiritual life, there's going to be seasons where we feel stuck. There's going to be seasons where we feel discouraged. There's going to be seasons where we feel forgotten. There's going to be seasons when we feel like this is meaningless. It might be meaningless to us, but it is not meaningless for God because God is doing something. Maybe God is teaching us to trust Him. Maybe God is teaching us to obey Him. Maybe God is preparing us for something in the future, right? So it's not a waste. And when Joseph's dream finally come true, when he became the second most powerful man in Egypt, and when his brothers all bowed down to him and were feared, when this dream finally come true, Joseph reflected on it. And in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, this is what Joseph said. He said this to his brothers. He said this, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." So when Joseph reflect on his life, he doesn't just see years of pain. He didn't just see years of being a slave. He didn't just see years of being accused. He didn't just see years of being a prisoner. What he see is that God was there. God planned for him to be there. God used those circumstances. God used those situations. God used it to accomplish His will in him. The Bible tells us that those that love God, everything happened for our good. Everything good happened for our good. Everything bad happened for our good. Everything that goes the way we want happened for our good. Everything that doesn't go the way we want happened for our good. Because we belong to Him and He has the best for us. Amen? So let's worship God together and let's seek His face together.